Tony Dalton nació en Inglaterra, es historiador del cine e investigador. Fue amigo de Terence Fisher y acaba de publicar la biografía Terence Fisher, maestro del horror gótico. Colaboró con el cineasta Ray Harryhausen, de quien ha conservado las miniaturas articuladas de sus películas. El nombre de su charla es Terence Fisher, el hombre, el cineasta.
Sean todos bienvenidos a esta última sesión del simposio dedicado a Terence Fisher. Hoy día vamos a encontrarnos con Tony Dalton, de quien ya se mencionó, fue amigo personal de Terence Fisher, Peter Cushing, Freddie Francis, que fue otro de los cineastas que trabajó en la Hammer, y una voz autorizada también para relatarnos algunos aspectos vinculados a la obra de este director. La entrevista la hicimos también hace algunas semanas para aprovechar de traducirla, subtitularla, y espero que puedan disfrutarla y conocer otra dimensión acerca de las condiciones de trabajo reales que tuvo Fisher durante su periodo en la Hammer, algo bastante revelador y muy poco glamoroso. Así que va un elemento historiográfico para conocer más de cerca los años del boom del terror británico de mano de Terence Fisher y la Hammer Films.
In the name of the Festival Internacional de Cine Recobrado de Valparaíso, we would like to welcome a guest who joined us from England for the opening of the symposium dedicated to the British filmmaker Terence Fisher. Today we have with us Tony Dalton, researcher and friend of this director, and who wrote an authorized biography entitled Terence Fisher, Master of Gothic Cinema, which will be available in bookshops next year. We will ask a series of questions in order to know a bit more about this man, considered by film experts to be primarily responsible for the development of horror film since the second half of the 20th century. Tony, welcome to this symposium.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Tony, Fisher starts as a clapper boy. He then works as an assistant editor in order to specialize in editing before he takes up directing films. How can we determine the importance of these experiences for his future activities?
I think it actually goes back a little bit further than that, if I may. He became a window dresser. You may find that slightly weird, but he became a window dresser in a department store called John Lewis in West London. And I think that's where he not only discovered cinema properly, he went to a lot of film at that time, became a member of a film club, but also, if you think of a window, a square window, a 4x3 window, and he actually designed material to go into that window. I think that's where he first started thinking about putting an image through that window to the people outside. He thought that as well. I asked him this at great length. I thought it was very interesting that he was a window dresser, as they're called. Not a window cleaner, sorry if I said that, but a window dresser. He was he had some very clever ideas for the period. This is mid-1930s, early to mid-1930s. He didn't enjoy it. He hated working for a department store. But I think that's probably where the creative element started. Before that, he was a merchant seaman, and I think that was not part of his. As far as I know, he never really made any great movies about the sea. Perhaps sea featured in some of the movies, but he never made any great movies about the sea. But I think the window dressing was a start. He went to a lot of cinemas in Chelsea at that time, which is where the department store was, and where he lived with his mother. And after that, at the store, he tried to find a job in the film business. He knew from going to the cinema he wanted to be in the film business. He went to a lot of films. He enjoyed watching John Ford, a lot of John Ford, and Frank Borzage as well. He liked comedy a great deal and love stories. He loved love stories. Anyhow, he got the job as a clapper boy, and of course that really started it all off. Very short period, less than a year as a clapper boy. The oldest clapper boy in the business, he called himself. I think he was 32 at that time. And he started in editing. He saw a lot of what the studio was doing and decided that editing was the art that he wanted to be in, at least at that time. And that's how it all started. He watched everybody else do lots of things and decided, he once told me that editing was a very good starting block in the film business because he could actually correct a lot of what the directors had done wrong. That's how he put it. But I don't know whether that was possible. Whether directors actually shot enough actually to put things right, I don't know at that time. Probably some of them did and some of them didn't. He worked on a Hitchcock. He worked with Flaherty and various other directors and learnt the trade that way. So yes, editing, sorry to come back to your original question, editing was absolutely vital for his final career as a director. But he never really involved himself in editing any of his films. He had too much respect for James Needs, in the case of Hammer, to actually interfere with it. And I think that he appreciated people not leaning over other people's shoulders, which I think some directors did when he was an editor. But he actually didn't interfere very much. According to James Needs, he came in at the beginning, saw a rough cut, and then made comments, and that was it when he became a director. So does that answer your question? Sorry.
Oh, yes, Tony, yes. Well, the films that made him famous, like The Curse of Frankenstein and Dracula, belong to the genre of horror and fantastic film. This happens between 1957 and 1958. But if we watch some of his first films, like So Long at the Fair or Four-Sided Triangle, we will find visual and argumentative elements which will be present in the rest of his work. Did Fisher believe in the fantastic?
I think you're forgetting one, if I may say so. That's Stolen Face. I think So Long at the Fair, yes, it was a fantasy movie, wonderful fantasy movie. And he directed most of it, by the way. Anthony, can't remember his name now. Sorry, it's gone from it. It's Late in the Evening. I think it did influence him a great deal, So Long at the Fair, but he didn't choose fantasy. He didn't choose anything that he directed. He was a jobbing director and he shot what he was given, basically. And he was very grateful to do that. But I think the horror, for me, started not with Four-Sided Triangle, which was a science fiction, really, more than a horror, but with Stolen Face. If you look at Stolen Face, Paul Henreid and Elizabeth was a wonderful film about different personalities, creating a monster from... He was a plastic surgeon. Paul Henreid is a plastic surgeon, and he creates another woman, the image of the woman that he loves in this woman, who is very common. She's a thief, she's a murderess, etc., etc. She becomes a monster, so she doesn't become the thing that he actually loves. She looks like her, but it's not the thing that she loves. So I think that's much closer to Frankenstein, and perhaps not to Dracula, but certainly to the Frankenstein sagas than almost anything else. Yes, to answer your question again, all those early films, every single one of them, from the day he started directing with Colonel Bogey, all the way through to Curse of Frankenstein, everything helped him to create Curse of Frankenstein and the other subsequent classic Gothic movies.
But his personal belief to the genre, and the horror and the religious text that we can find in his films. Did he felt close to these subjects?
I'm sorry to say this, but you're breaking up a little bit. My apologies. I've just had something flash in front of me saying it's unstable. I hope you can hear me a lot better than I can see you. Sorry. That's fine. Sorry, can you say that again? My apologies.
His thoughts about the fantastic and the religious that we can find in his films. Which was his feelings about these subjects?
About religion, good and evil.
Yes.
Yes. Terry, Mickey will probably answer that a little bit better than I can, which I'm sure she will. But my belief in Terry, and I talked to him a great deal, I talked to him and Peter Cushing a great deal about religion and about good and evil. I talked to Peter long before I talked to Terry. Peter introduced me to Terry, so it was a long time before. But Terry was a religious man. He wasn't a devout religious man, but he did believe in good and evil, most definitely believed in good and evil. And that shows in a lot of his films, not just the Gothic horrors, but also the earlier ones, the film noir subjects that he made for Hammer films prior to Curse. And he always said that it was very important that good always won over evil, which of course often does, not always, but it often does. And he believed very strongly in that, and it comes out in a lot of his films. Now, I think I'll give you another example a little bit later on, but I think when he received a script, I think you have to realize he received a script written by Jimmy Sangster or whoever it would be. That script wouldn't give you, it would give you the basics. It would give you dialogue. It would give you shooting suggestions, not always to be taken notice of, because it depends on the set. And I think that Terry interpreted those films, certainly The Good and the Evil, very simplistically, because that's what Hammer wanted to do. But he was perfect for that kind of directing, because he was a very straightforward, easy director. He got on with almost everybody, with very few exceptions. Christopher Lee, he wasn't that close to, but then very few people were. I think that I would say that he, all of his films, all of them, including Portrait from Life, which is a very early one with Maya Zetterling and Robert Beatty, was a very good example of good and evil. Herbert Lom played the villain, the ex-Nazi villain, and of course Maya Zetterling was the was the goodness that came out of the Second World War. And I think a lot of it has good and evil in it. I think he believed very strongly in there was an afterlife. His mother was a Christian Scientist. I don't know whether you knew that. And I think that he was brought up on that menu of religion. And I think that he was deep down actually quite a religious person. Just before he died, Mickey gave him the Christian Science Bible, the book or whatever it's called. And he did make some notes in that, which is in the book. And it had mostly to do with religion, with good and evil. So, sorry, that's all I can really tell you about that. I'm not he didn't talk about it massively. Morag, his wife, after Terry died, talked about it a little bit more, but she would simply say he was a very devout person when it came to good and evil. He was a very good person. Terry lived a very good life. There wasn't an evil bone in his body, and so I don't think he understood evil at all. But in some of the films, he can certainly illustrate it in Dracula and Frankenstein was a terrible man. I spoke to Peter Cushing once and I said, why is it you're always playing evil men? He said, I've never played an evil man, ever. And I said, but what about Frankenstein then? What about the Sheriff of Nottingham? He was an evil man. And he said, well, apart from those, yes, I've never played an evil man. But he did. I mean, Peter was very good at it. Because Peter was a good man. He was a very, very good person. And he played evil because he, I think, didn't understand it. He played it in a theatrical manner, you know, the way Shakespeare portrayed it, if you like. But Terry certainly was a very kind, generous man. And I think it comes out in his films. I think that good always wins. That's in the script, of course, but good does always win. The Devil Rides Out is a very good example of that. He loved that film. That's probably one of the... I say one of his favourites, certainly one of his favourites. It wasn't his favourite, but one of his favourites. And I think that is probably the ideal example of good and evil, as per Terry Fisher. Dennis Wheatley, who wrote the story, wrote to him after he made the film and congratulated him on doing a good job on his book. So I don't think there's ever been another Dennis Wheatley book turned into a film that's been as good as that, but I'm probably wrong.
In French magazines like Midi, Minuit, Fantastique or Positif, you can find some statements made by Fisher which suggest that he believes that the most important thing in people's lives is not the body but the soul. Will it be accurate to say that his films are philosophical and religious proposals to understand human nature presented within a popular genre like horror film?
I think, to answer your question, no, I don't. I think he believed in the soul. He very much believed in the soul, which is very illustrated in Frankenstein Created Woman. It's all about the soul, the capturing of the soul. And I think generally speaking, in that film, it does apply. But I don't think to other films. I think they're just straightforward good and evil stories. I think they're just well made. I think they're beautifully well made. If I may just touch on this, because it's not just Terry, as I'm sure you already know. There was a whole team of people at Bray Studios, at Hammer Films, working on these. You've got Bernard Robinson. The sets are just superb. The music, James Need, the editor. You've got so many others, and Tony Hines, who's the producer on most of them. And this is what I call a magic box. It doesn't happen very often. It happens in Hollywood occasionally. Star Wars is a good example. There was a magic box to begin with, and it created so many great characters. I think the Carry On films over here are a magic box. I think they work very, very, very well. And I think Hammer Films had that magic box. So I don't think most of his films are done for a purpose. I think they're there. He was a jobbing director, going back to it. He's a jobbing director who wanted to see something put on the screen as good as could possibly ever be made.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, don't worry. Which were the working conditions at Hammer Films?
What were the working conditions?
Yes.
At Bray Studios, yeah.
Yes.
Pretty bad. I've been there a few times. I went there a few times when they were still making movies, but the end of their period, the end of Hammer Films. I then went back when they were making Alien. They did all the special effects for Alien at Bray Studios. I went back there and it degenerated badly. Terrible is the short answer. During the golden period, I think after Curse of Frankenstein, that was the golden period. Even after the Quatermass movies, it did improve somewhat. They built a new soundstage and things like that. But people like makeup and makeup and various other parts of the magic box, they were working in tiny little rooms. In fact, I think the makeup department was in a toilet. So it was pretty bad. And most of it was filmed at the old house. A lot of it was filmed at the old house, which is still there now, a hotel. And it's I think, compared with Elstree Studios or Pinewood Studios or MGM or whatever, I think they were pretty crude. But they made them for next to nothing. I mean, the amount of money that was spent on them, if it cost £100,000, it was too much money. And £100,000 today is not one person's wage, you know. So I think you have to think in terms of done cheaply, done quickly, and that's how they made their money. And they were made for money. Let's not forget that. And Terry wanted them to look as good as possible. That's why he worked very closely with James Bernard as far as sets are concerned. Sorry, Bernard Robinson, forgive me. James Bernard was the composer. Bernard Robinson. And he, I think a lot of the sets were really, when you look at it, all the reds and everything, are very, very much Bernie Robinson, very, very much. But Terry used all that. He knew how to use what he had in front of him. And he would change parts of the script to suit the set. And he would talk to Peter or whoever the actor was or the actress was and actually change it slightly, change a view of it slightly. One thing that always made me amazed, sorry, I'm going off the subject a little bit, is the globe in Dracula, you know, where there's this great big globe in the middle of the room, I think. And that was Bernie Robinson's idea, but Terry used it to such wonderful effect. You know, they're really going around the world, this good and evil on either side of the world. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful piece. But Terry used that. He would see the point of curtains in the case of Dracula pulling, Van Helsing pulling the curtains down, like flooding into the room, because everything is dark in that room, or it's in fair darkness in that room, and then this light floods into the room. That was all, you know, on the spur of the moment. I mean, I don't think it was in the script, but I think it was done separately, done differently to what was in the script. In fact, I know it was. But I think it's working at Bray was not easy. But Terry absolutely loved it. And anybody who worked there, anybody but anybody. Peter, I met Rennie, I can't remember her name now, sorry. Continuity lady, a few years ago, she was 90. And she said they were the best years of my life working at Hammer. And I think they were. I think you've got people like James Carreras, and you've got Michael, of course. They were good at what they did, and Tony Hines being one of the best producers, I think, ever. Very underrated, Tony Hines. And I know Terry would want me to mention Tony Hines, and he's mentioned a lot in the book, because he never got proper recognition. But the talent there was unbelievable. But the working conditions were not great.
Well, in those years, before actually shooting the film, you had to send the script and the preliminary edition to the British Board of Film Classification.
Right.
Apparently, there have always been problems with censorship, and the films Fisher directed not always turned out the way he wanted. Are there any anecdotes thereon you can share with us?
Well, yes. I mean, there are two that come to mind. There are two that come to mind. I think certainly, as you say, the scripts were always submitted to John Trevelyan, who was then head of the British Board of Film Censors. And in the book, I quote quite a few quotes from their notes about the films. And they said this script can't possibly be made. The number of times they said that, and yet they were made. The one that had the most problems, the one that had more problems than anything else, was The Curse of the Werewolf, because of the rape scene. The girl in the prison is raped by Richard Wordsworth, the tramp, the hobo that sort of stops off at the castle. and that they would not allow that. There was just no way they could allow it. And in the film now, we see him glaring at the girl bosom heaving, glaring at the camera, frightened out of her mind, screaming, and that's kind of all we get. But it was much longer than that, much longer than that. They did shoot him attacking her, getting hold of her, but they had to cut it. The British Board of Film Censors wouldn't allow it. And I think it's a great pity, because I think the film suffers for that. And Terry was always very angry about that. And I think it does suffer. There were lots of other examples of cutting. I think another rape sequence was the opposite, I should say, was another rape sequence in Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, where Peter attacks the young girl, whose name I've forgotten, sorry.
Veronica Carlson.
Sorry?
Veronica Carlson.
Right, thank you. Whom he liked very much. And that was not in the script. That rape sequence was not in the script. But it came down from high, as Terry puts it, that they had to put a rape sequence in. Why? I have no idea. If you watch that film without the rape sequence, it's much better. The rape sequence just stops it. Peter Cushing, Frankenstein up to that point, has not given you any idea that he actually fancies the girl. No idea whatsoever. He's pretty evil in it, but he doesn't fancy the girl. And then suddenly he pounces on her. And I don't understand why that's in there. There's lots of stories, some of which came down from James Carreras, from Michael Carreras, and the American distributor insisted that there was a little bit of raunchiness in it. But I'm afraid it really does grate on me. It's a great movie, Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. I think perhaps it would be one of my favorites, if not my favorite, Terry movie. Because it's just a good, strong movie. But especially when the body is found in the ground and the burst pipe, wonderful sequence. But I don't like the rape. But going back to Curse of Werewolf, this happened quite a lot. But mostly when the censor came back and with lots of lines crossed through the script, they would sometimes change the script, but mostly ignore it. I think I learned that from Freddie Francis, who also directed some Hammer horrors, a couple of Gothic films as well. And he said we would just film it in a slightly different way. And as long as it didn't become offensive, they found that they could actually get away with it up to a point. But in the case of Curse of the Werewolf, no way could you actually remotely illustrate a rape sequence. So, yes, they did have problems.
And the last question. If we analyze the visual aspect, we will find that there is a clear arrangement on the objects and characters within every shot, like top, bottom, right, left, apart from the use of objects with geometric shapes, without forgetting the numerological aspects. Evidence of the latter is shown in the use of objects that are going to be used within the numbers 3, 5, and 7, and the multiples thereof. Do you think that this is a form used to build an atmosphere and, in addition, to give us information on a symbolic level?
No. The reason I say that is that I've been on a film set, I'm sure you have as well. I've been on a film set and it doesn't happen like that. I know at Hammer, don't forget the two things at Hammer, very important. Make it for as little money as possible, as well as possible, but for as little as money as possible, and as quick as you possibly can. 5 weeks maximum. 5 weeks. 5 weeks to shoot a 110-minute or 100-minute movie, which is pretty rough going, even by today's standards. I think not that many people could do it, with a proper film crew, I mean. I think no is the short answer. He didn't compose on purpose. A lot of it was accidental. He would get on the set. I gave you the example of the Globe earlier. He came on set and there it was. He hadn't planned it. He hadn't done anything. But as soon as he saw it, he knew that's wonderful. We'll do a scene around the Globe. And that's how that scene happened. And I think it's with Van Helsing and it was with Van Helsing and Dracula. And I think it worked so well. There are lots of examples that Terry would put in. The cross in Dracula, the cross made from the candlesticks, that was Peter. Nothing to do with Terry at all. Peter had made a film years and years before. I think he'd made the film. No, I think he was in a stage play years before. And it happened that he used two candlesticks for a particular. I've got a thing saying I'm. Oh, right. Sorry. Forgive me. Sorry, I don't know what that was all about. He used two candlesticks in this thing for this play, and he used the same thing in Dracula, which was a wonderful idea. Now, in the script, it doesn't happen like that. He falls onto the floor, and to kill him into the sunlight, they were going to use a crucifix. But Peter saw the two candlesticks. In fact, they had candelabras, lots of candles in candelabras, and he changed them for two Gothic brass candlesticks, and he did the cross. It just happened. And that's the way somebody once asked him about the red curtains. I think it was in Brides of Dracula. And he said they were just there. He said the curtains were just there. Bernie had done his job, and he knew Terry liked red a great deal. In fact, the Curse of Frankenstein, the red leaves, when he kills the grandfather and the boy in the forest, he painted the leaves red because it was supposed to be autumn. It wasn't quite autumn, I think, when they filmed it, and he painted them redder to illustrate blood. But they were there. The curtains were there, going back to the curtains, were there because Bernie Robinson probably knew that Terry liked red, and he used those to great effect. So to cut a long story short, I think that he was a great director in the sense that he could actually use what was in front of him. Not every directors do. And don't forget, although he would talk to Bernie Robinson about the set, he wouldn't have planned it with Bernie. He would have let him just get on with it. As long as the walls broke down and you could actually fragment the set and he could do various camera angles, he didn't really care what it looked like as long as it suited what he wanted to do. And it always did. If you look at his early films, the sets are tiny. They're almost like filming in a closet. And I think he used high shots for those. He uses high shots in Four-Sided Triangle, you mentioned that earlier. A lot of high shots on the barn sequence, which is very clever because it makes it look much bigger. It wasn't a particularly big set. But there's one, I think, Face the Music, where it's a tiny little dressing room and he puts the camera very high up. So there's a lot of people in the dressing room, but it doesn't look small. It actually looks quite large because of his camera angle. He used that in Stranglers of Bombay. I can't think of anything else, but he was very clever at adapting to the set. And if it wasn't up to scratch, he would perhaps change the scene slightly. Sorry, that was a bit rambly, Jamie, but does that answer your question?
Yes, Tony. Well, I want to give you a thank for sharing these minutes and helping us to reveal Mr. Fisher's personality, his working process, and the outreach of his work. Thank you for being part of this symposium dedicated to one of the great directors of all times.
I have to agree with you there. I think he was probably the shyest man I ever met, strangely enough. But he loved company, he loved people, and he loved having fun. He was a great director, and I agree with you. Thank you, Jamie. Been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bueno, Ahí estuvo esta conversación con Tony Dalton, quien con propiedad pudo contarnos algunos aspectos y evidenciar también que cuando se empieza a analizar una obra cinematográfica, literaria o musical, hay que tener en cuenta que una obra, cuando sale a la luz, deja de pertenecerle al autor, al creador, y pasa a ser propiedad de la audiencia, del público, de los receptores. Y los análisis inevitablemente van a comenzar a aparecer. Análisis de los cuales los creadores a veces, y esto ya lo dijimos y se ha conversado en otras ponencias, no están conscientes de lo que crean y de los alcances de las obras. Es más, en una conversación posterior que tuvimos con Tony, hablamos sobre el tema de la simbología. Hay elementos de simbología masónica en algunas películas de Fisher, lo que se mencionaba acerca de las disposiciones de izquierda a derecha, arriba a abajo. Empezamos a ver el tema numerológico y Tony guardaba silencio. Y en un momento me dice, terminé de escribir el libro y nunca me había dado cuenta de las cosas que estás planteando. Pudiste haberme las dicho antes para haber mirado las películas desde esa otra perspectiva. Así que, ¿qué nos indica esa respuesta? Que hay que seguir analizando, investigando. No solamente quedarnos con el elemento factual, la conversación, la presencialidad en el rodaje de una película, sino también este proceso creativo, intuitivo, que algunos cineastas, no todos, pero algunos cineastas tienen, que enriquecen su obra, que le dan diversas lecturas, pero en las cuales ellos muchas veces no han reparado, porque están muy cercanos al proceso de creación. Hay una frase hermosa que la voy a citar, no recuerdo el autor. El artista lo sabe todo, solo que se da cuenta después. Así que quedamos atentos por si hay consultas por parte del público. Constanza. Buenos días, Constanza.
Hola, buenos días. Aquí Constanza. Bueno, buenos días, Jaime. Buenos días a todas las personas presentes. Sí tenemos una pregunta muy interesante y un saludo, un infaltable saludo para nuestro querido Jaime, que no solamente es el director de nuestro festival y que ahora está, quien ha sembrado el cariño de los amantes del cine en las aulas que ha pisado, y ahora en situaciones como esta se ven los frutos. El saludo viene de parte de Grom, que dice: excelente y amena entrevista. Gracias, Jaime, por esto y por la organización de este gran simposio. Saludos desde Villa Alemana. Ahora la pregunta que viene es de Carlos Lloró, que nos acompañó el día martes, así que unos especiales saludos para él. La pregunta es, para Jaime, ¿será posible que el profundo simbolismo de los fans de Fisher, así como su trasfondo filosófico, pase desapercibido por los críticos ingleses a causa de este curioso fenómeno llamado miopía intelectual, que surge cuando uno está demasiado cerca de aquello que estudia?
Sí, bueno, gracias por la pregunta, Carlos. Por supuesto, a veces el análisis de una obra que está adelantada a su época va a permitir que sea incomprendida, y luego, cuando es redescubierta por algún motivo, empezamos a encontrar aspectos relevantes que en su momento pasaron desapercibidos. Lo mismo que acabo de comentar con Tony Dalton. Ve las películas, sabe que a Fisher le gusta el color rojo, muchas veces los símbolos son producto del azar del rodaje, pero la significancia que adquieren a posteriori, cuando la obra ya está terminada, y cuando un espectador que no sabe cómo fue el proceso de creación de esa obra, muchas veces las condiciones de rodaje o de la composición de una obra musical o la redacción de un libro pueden ser elementos muy poco artísticos, muy poco ortodoxos, pero uno como espectador siempre recibe ese impacto final, el de la obra terminada, acabada, pulida. Y uno encuentra diversos factores que si se repiten en otras obras, en el caso de las películas de Fisher, eso empieza ya a crear un discurso. En La Gorgona, como conversábamos con Tony en otra ocasión, en los lugares donde la Gorgona se manifiesta, hay crucifijos que están a la izquierda del plano. Cuando hay lugares donde la Gorgona no está presente, tenemos cruces a la derecha. Si esto hubiese ocurrido solamente en una sola película, perfecto. Producto del azar, dirección de arte, etc. Pero cuando vemos El fantasma de la ópera, la escena del metatexto, es decir, la ópera dentro de la película, cuando Juana está siendo, Juana de Arco, ¿no? Está siendo condenada a la hoguera, la Inquisición de la Iglesia Católica está a la izquierda del plano con una tremenda cruz que casi se abalanza sobre el espectador. En cambio, en otra escena, cuando Juana está liderando al ejército francés en contra de los ingleses, hay una cruz que está a la derecha del plano y está con ella. Entonces, cuando uno observa estos elementos, que a veces son minúsculos, uno no repara en ellos, los candelabros con los números 3, 5 y 7, que están íntimamente vinculados con la simbología masónica y los grados de conocimiento y perfeccionamiento, y que además representan la psicología de los personajes y las acciones que van a permitir que ganen o sucumban frente al mal, uno empieza a armar un discurso y empieza a encontrar una lectura lógica de película en película y de equipo en equipo. Porque Bernard Robinson fallece por allá a mediados de los 60 y después lo reemplazan otros directores de arte que van a acompañar a Fisher hasta 1972. Y vamos a ver que el trabajo de los colores y la disposición de los objetos sigue siendo exactamente el mismo. E incluso en películas que no están hechas para la Hammer, como las que comentó Eduardo Russo, también tienen este mismo uso de símbolos, siendo que el equipo técnico es totalmente distinto y ajeno a la Hammer. Y ahí uno se pregunta, ¿es el temperamento artístico? ¿Es un estilo visual que le acomoda a Fisher? Entonces, son dudas. Lamentablemente no tenemos a Terence Fisher acá para que nos responda de primera mano, pero como pregunta Carlos, esta miopía también se debe a que en el caso de la crítica especializada se ve lo que se quiere ver. No es un análisis académico. La crítica cumple una función informativa. Si una película es buena, interesante, entretenida, cuántos premios ganó, cuánto presupuesto tuvo, cuánto recaudó, que yo creo que son elementos contra los cuales hay que combatir. Una película no puede medirse en términos de éxito o fracaso, en términos económicos o de entretención. Si vamos a analizar seriamente una obra, hay que meterse en la estética, en la historia del arte, en hacer un seguimiento a la obra del autor y también comparar con otras películas similares de la misma época, o anteriores, o posteriores. Por lo tanto, el trabajo de análisis es un trabajo que implica una mayor profundidad en el desarrollo de argumentos, hipótesis, que ayudan a disfrutar de mejor manera una obra y no quedarse con esta primera impresión o simplemente con la voluntad de entretención que uno puede tener al momento de aproximarse a estas películas, sino que hay algo más. Hay algo que alimenta el intelecto, alimenta el espíritu y permite conectar, incluso de forma rizomática, estas obras con otros aspectos artísticos, históricos, sociales.
Muchas gracias, Jaime. Como siempre, un verdadero agrado escuchar sus respuestas, sus análisis. Aprovecho de saludar a todas las personas que están presentes e invitarlos. Y extiendo la invitación, por supuesto, aquí a Patricia Alfonso, quien ya se encuentra con nosotros, a mantenerse al día con las novedades del festival, tanto en Facebook, que nos pueden encontrar como Cine Recobrado, y en Instagram como Cine Recobrado Valparaíso.
Constanza, y también agregar que a las 11:55 vamos a darnos un pequeño break. Vamos a comenzar con la presentación de Patricio Alfonso. Así que, por favor, aprovechen de buscar una taza de té, ¿cierto? Y nos encontramos en 4 minutos más para conocer acerca del vampiro, la upirología, mitos en torno a esta figura histórica que nos ha acompañado desde nuestras más tiernas pesadillas.